Lights inside the Las Vegas Hilton International showroom dimmed one by one, until thousands of voices faded into a restless silence. It was August 1972, and the city that never truly slept seemed to pause for a single heartbeat. Backstage, Elvis Presley stood alone in front of a mirror. His black leather suit reflected the soft yellow bulbs surrounding the dressing room glass. He rolled his shoulders, flexed his fingers, and quietly adjusted the silver cross hanging around his neck. Outside, nearly 2,000 fans chanted his name in rhythm. Elvis, Elvis, Elvis. He had heard that chant thousands of times before, yet somehow, tonight felt different. Charlie Hodge knocked gently on the dressing room door. 5 minutes, Elvis smiled. I'll be there. Charlie hesitated instead of leaving. There's something you should probably know. Elvis looked up. Charlie wasn't usually nervous. What is it? The front row. What about it? There's a little boy. Elvis chuckled. There are always little kids. Charlie slowly shook his head. No, not like this one. He handed Elvis a folded note that one of the ushers had received from the boy's parents. Elvis unfolded it. The handwriting trembled across the page. Dear Mr. Presley, our son Daniel is 11 years old. He was born with Down syndrome. Doctors told us he would probably never speak. Most days, he doesn't. But whenever he hears music, something changes. Especially your music. Tonight is his dream. Elvis read the letter twice, then 3 times. He looked toward Charlie. So he doesn't talk? Charlie answered quietly. According to his parents, almost never. Elvis folded the paper carefully instead of tossing it aside. Where are they sitting? Front row, right side. Elvis nodded. I'll keep an eye out. The orchestra began the opening fanfare. The curtains slowly lifted. The room exploded. Thousands of people jumped to their feet as Elvis walked onto the stage beneath brilliant white spotlights. The applause was deafening. Women screamed, men whistled. Camera flashes sparkled like tiny stars across the audience. Elvis flashed his familiar grin. Good evening! The crowd answered with another roar. Without wasting another second, the band launched into C.C. Rider. The energy inside the showroom became electric. Every move, every smile, every guitar strum reminded everyone why Elvis Presley remained the biggest entertainer in America. Song after song, the audience clapped, laughed, cried, and sang along. But every few minutes, Elvis found himself glancing toward the right side of the front row. He finally spotted them, a small boy wearing a neatly pressed white shirt, dark hair combed carefully to one side, tiny hands folded together in his lap. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't screaming. He wasn't waving. He simply stared at Elvis with enormous brown eyes, almost as if he were memorizing every second. Beside him sat his parents. His mother held a handkerchief tightly. His father never took his eyes off his son. Every time Elvis looked in their direction, the mother smiled with tears already gathering in her eyes. Halfway through the concert, Elvis began talking with the audience between songs. I've been coming to Las Vegas quite a bit now. Laughter. I think you all know more about me than my own family. More laughter. Someone shouted, We love you, Elvis. He pointed toward them. I love you too. The applause rolled across the room again. As it slowly settled, Elvis heard something unexpected. A very soft humming. It wasn't coming from the orchestra, nor from the audience. It came from the front row, from Daniel. The boy wasn't speaking. He wasn't singing words, only humming. Perfectly. Every note matched the orchestra. Every rhythm landed exactly where it belonged. Elvis nearly missed his next cue. He looked toward Charlie. Charlie noticed it too. The musicians continued playing, unaware of what was happening. Elvis couldn't stop watching. The boy never looked frightened, never looked distracted. His eyes remained fixed on Elvis, as though the entire world had disappeared. Backstage employees had heard stories about children like Daniel. Some whispered that music could reach places ordinary conversation never could. Elvis wasn't sure what to believe. But standing on that stage, watching the little boy hum every melody without missing a note, he began wondering if there really were mysteries doctors couldn't explain. After another standing ovation, Elvis stepped toward the microphone again. "You folks mind if we slow things down just a little?" The audience cheered. He picked up his acoustic guitar. The room became quieter. The first gentle chords echoed through the showroom. Instead of singing immediately, Elvis looked toward Daniel again. The little boy's lips moved. Still no words, only silent shapes, almost as though he already knew what was coming. Elvis smiled to himself. "Well," he whispered into the microphone, "looks like somebody out there knows this one." The audience laughed warmly. Daniel's parents exchanged nervous glances. His mother lowered her head. She knew exactly what Elvis had noticed. As Elvis played, memories flooded his own mind. He remembered being a shy young boy in Tupelo, remembered walking into church, remembered hearing gospel harmonies that made him feel understood long before fame ever found him. Music had spoken to him before success, before money, before the screaming crowds. Perhaps it was speaking to Daniel now. The song ended. Thunderous applause followed. Elvis bowed, but instead of calling for the next number, he remained perfectly still. Something inside him refused to move on. He looked once more toward the front row. Daniel smiled. Not a wide smile, not an excited smile, just a quiet, peaceful smile. The kind that reached all the way into someone's soul. Elvis suddenly turned toward Charlie. "Bring me another microphone." Charlie blinked. "Right now?" "Right now." The stage manager frowned from the wings. This wasn't in the schedule. Nothing like this had been rehearsed. Charlie hurried anyway. Within seconds, he returned carrying a vintage silver microphone. Elvis took it without explanation. The audience watched curiously. Even the orchestra looked confused. Elvis stepped slowly down the stairs leading off the stage. Thousands of people leaned forward in their seats. No one understood what he was doing. Neither did Daniel's parents. His mother's hands began trembling. His father quietly whispered, "Daniel." The little boy looked up. Elvis stopped only a few feet away. He knelt until they were almost eye level. The entire showroom had become so silent that someone could have dropped a coin onto the wooden floor and everyone would have heard it. Elvis smiled warmly. "Hello there, son." Daniel stared into his eyes. No answer. No movement. Only silence. Elvis didn't seem disappointed. Instead, he gently held out the microphone. "I heard you humming." Daniel blinked. The audience held its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the orchestra waited with instruments frozen in their hands. For several endless seconds, nothing happened. Then, very slowly, Daniel lifted his trembling hands toward the microphone. And at that exact moment, Elvis realized this night was about to become unlike any concert he had ever performed. The silver microphone rested only inches from Daniel's trembling hands. For what felt like an eternity, he simply stared at it. The audience remained completely silent, not one cough, not one whisper. Nearly 2,000 people watched an 11-year-old boy fight a battle that no one else could see. Elvis never rushed him. He had spent enough years on stage to know that silence could be more powerful than applause. He lowered himself onto one knee. "You don't have to if you don't want to." His voice was barely louder than a whisper. Daniel looked toward his mother. She had already begun crying, not because she expected a miracle, but because she feared disappointment. For years, well-meaning strangers had asked Daniel to say hello. "Can you tell me your name? Can you wave?" Every failed attempt had ended with awkward smiles and pity. His parents hated those moments. They had promised themselves they would never put him through that again. Yet here they were. The biggest entertainer in America had unknowingly created exactly the same situation. Daniel's father quietly reached for his wife's hand. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "we leave proud." She nodded. He already won by coming. Elvis sensed their fear immediately. He gently lowered the microphone. "I'm sorry." He smiled kindly at Daniel. "I didn't mean to make you nervous." He started to stand. Then something happened. Very softly, almost too quietly to hear, a single note floated through the showroom. Elvis froze. The orchestra members looked toward one another. Another note followed. Then another. Daniel wasn't speaking. He was humming. Perfectly. The melody matched the guitar still hanging from Elvis's shoulder. Every pitch landed exactly where it belonged. Elvis slowly sat back down instead of returning to the stage. He strummed one chord. Daniel answered with the next note. Another chord. Another perfect response. The audience watched in stunned disbelief. Nobody dared clap. Nobody wanted to interrupt whatever mysterious conversation was unfolding between a guitar and a little boy. Charlie Hodge stood backstage with his mouth slightly open. "I've never seen anything like this." One of the orchestra musicians whispered, "He's finding every note." Another replied, "Without even looking." The pianist slowly removed his hands from the keyboard. "This kid has perfect pitch." No one answered, because they all knew how extraordinary that was. Elvis smiled wider than he had all evening. "Well now," he chuckled softly, "you've got good ears." Daniel's eyes brightened, not because of the compliment, because Elvis had spoken gently, without treating him differently, without pity, only respect. Elvis looked toward the audience. "I think our young friend here knows more music than he's letting on." Laughter spread through the showroom. Warm, affectionate. Daniel smiled. His mother covered her mouth. She hadn't seen that smile in weeks. Elvis slowly began playing another familiar progression. Not one of his own songs. A simple country melody. Something every musician of the era recognized immediately. The opening chords of "I Walk the Line." Several people in the audience smiled with recognition. Others quietly began tapping their feet. Elvis wasn't planning to sing. He simply wanted to see what Daniel would do. The first verse never came. Instead, Daniel's lips began moving. His father noticed first. His breathing became faster. His mother's eyes widened. "No," she whispered. "He can't." Daniel took one slow breath. Then another. The microphone trembled slightly in his hands. Elvis stopped strumming. The silence returned. Every spotlight seemed brighter than before. Thousands of eyes focused on one little boy. Then, in a voice so gentle it almost disappeared into the room, Daniel sang, "I keep a close watch on this heart of mine." The words were clear, soft, perfectly in rhythm. His mother gasped. His father stood so suddenly that his chair tipped backward onto the floor. Nobody cared. The audience wasn't looking at him. They couldn't take their eyes off Daniel. He continued, "I keep my eyes wide open all the time." Each word carried innocence rather than performance. There was no attempt to impress anyone. He wasn't singing for applause. He wasn't even looking at the audience. He looked only at Elvis, as though Elvis were the only person in the room. Elvis forgot to play. For perhaps the first time in years, the king of rock and roll stood completely speechless. Charlie quietly whispered from backstage, "Keep playing." Elvis blinked. "Oh," he smiled. "Right." He gently joined Daniel with his guitar, not leading him, following him, giving the boy all the space he needed. The audience noticed. Elvis wasn't performing anymore, he was accompanying. And somehow, that made the moment even more powerful. By the second verse, tears flowed freely throughout the showroom. An elderly couple in the third row held each other. A young waitress working near the aisle quietly wiped her eyes with her apron. Even several security guards looked away, pretending to study the exits. They didn't want anyone to see them crying. Daniel reached the chorus. His confidence slowly grew. His voice became stronger, not louder, just stronger. Every note carried surprising control. Years of silently absorbing music had somehow shaped his voice. It wasn't polished. It wasn't professionally trained. It was something rarer. It was honest. When the final chord faded away, silence returned once more, a deep, sacred silence. Nobody moved, nobody clapped. The room almost seemed afraid that applause might break whatever miracle they had just witnessed. Daniel looked down. He thought perhaps he had done something wrong. Children often recognized silence as failure. His smile slowly disappeared. Elvis noticed immediately. Without saying a word, he began clapping. One pair of hands. Then Charlie joined, then the orchestra, then Daniel's parents. Within seconds, every single person inside the showroom rose to their feet. The standing ovation crashed through the theater like thunder. People cheered, people cried, people shouted Daniel's name after hearing Elvis ask it softly into the microphone. "Let's hear it for Daniel!" The applause only became louder. Daniel looked around in complete confusion. He had never experienced anything like this. His mother wrapped both arms around him, still crying, still laughing, still unable to believe what had just happened. Elvis leaned closer to Daniel. "So," he asked with a grin, "who taught you to sing like that?" Daniel looked into Elvis's eyes. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, in barely more than a whisper, he spoke 4 words that made Elvis's smile slowly fade into astonishment. "No one," Daniel said. "I just listened." Elvis felt chills run down his arms, because in that single sentence, he realized this remarkable little boy wasn't simply remembering songs. He was hearing music in a way that very few people ever could. And Elvis suddenly knew the concert was no longer the most important thing that would happen that night. The applause refused to end. It rolled across the Las Vegas Hilton showroom like wave after wave crashing against a rocky shore. People who had come expecting another unforgettable Elvis Presley concert had witnessed something none of them could explain. Some were still standing. Others were wiping tears from their faces. A few simply stared at Daniel as if they had just seen the impossible. Elvis looked around the room before raising one hand. The audience slowly settled back into their seats. He smiled toward Daniel. "You know," he said into the microphone, "I've sung in a lot of places." The audience chuckled softly. "I've played for presidents, movie stars, kings, and folks who saved up a year's wages just to sit in these seats." He paused. "But tonight," his eyes drifted toward Daniel, "I think all of us just learned something." The showroom became silent again. Elvis rested one hand on Daniel's shoulder. "It isn't always the loudest voice that reaches people's hearts." The audience answered with gentle applause. Daniel looked down shyly. He still didn't understand why everyone kept looking at him. To him, he had simply sung a song. The orchestra quietly began preparing for the next number. Charlie stepped closer. "We're running behind schedule." Elvis smiled. "We can make up time." Charlie laughed. "You know Colonel won't like that." Elvis shrugged. "He'll survive." The musicians smiled. They had seen this side of Elvis many times. Whenever someone needed kindness more than the show needed timing, Elvis almost always chose kindness. Before returning to center stage, Elvis leaned close to Daniel. "Would you and your folks mind waiting backstage after the show?" Daniel looked at his parents instead of answering. His mother nodded immediately. "It would be an honor." His father managed to whisper, "Thank you." Elvis tipped his head politely. "No," he replied. "Thank you." The concert continued. "Burning love. You gave me a mountain. Love me tender." The audience sang every chorus. The energy returned. People danced in the aisles. Couples embraced. Children climbed onto their parents' shoulders. Yet something had changed. Every time Elvis glanced toward the front row, Daniel wasn't watching the lights, or the crowd, or the dancers. He watched only the musicians. His eyes followed every guitar change, every piano chord, every drum fill, almost as though he could see music itself. Elvis noticed, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. Nearly 45 minutes later, the final encore ended. The curtain slowly closed. The crowd continued chanting Elvis's name long after the band had finished. Backstage became its usual whirlwind. Assistants hurried through hallways carrying guitars. Security officers escorted guests. Reporters waited near the exit, hoping for a quick interview. Colonel Tom Parker appeared wearing his familiar white suit. He looked at Elvis. "What happened out there?" Elvis laughed. "You mean besides the concert?" "The kid." "What about him?" Colonel crossed his arms. "You changed half the show." "I know." "You never changed the show." "I did tonight." Colonel sighed dramatically. "You have the biggest act in America." "I know." "And yet somehow," he smiled despite himself, "you let an 11-year-old steal it." Elvis looked toward the dressing room hallway. "No," he answered quietly. "He reminded us why we're here." Colonel stared at him for several seconds, then smiled. "I suppose that's why people love you." A few minutes later, Daniel entered backstage holding his mother's hand. Without the bright stage lights, he looked even smaller. The excitement of the concert had faded. His confidence seemed to disappear with it. He lowered his eyes. His father spoke first. "Mr. Presley," Elvis immediately interrupted. "Please," he smiled. "Call me Elvis." Daniel's parents exchanged surprised glances. His mother laughed nervously. "I don't think I can." Elvis grinned. "You'd be surprised." The room relaxed. Several members of the TCB band quietly remained nearby. James Burton leaned against a wall with his guitar. Ronnie Tutt sat beside his drum case. Jerry Sheff poured himself coffee. None of them wanted to leave. They all sensed this evening wasn't quite over. Elvis reached for an acoustic guitar resting against the couch. Instead of speaking, he played one gentle chord. Daniel immediately looked up. Another chord. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Elvis intentionally changed keys. A difficult one. Most trained singers would need a moment to adjust. Daniel didn't. His eyes closed. He softly hummed the new note instantly. James Burton slowly lowered his coffee cup. "No way," he whispered. Elvis played another unexpected chord, then another. Daniel followed every single one. Without hesitation, without searching, without making a mistake. The room became unbelievably quiet. Jerry Sheff finally spoke. "He's hearing the harmony before we finish playing it." Ronnie frowned. "That's impossible." James shook his head. "No," he whispered. "I think he's right." Elvis looked at Daniel with growing curiosity. "Can I try something?" Daniel nodded. Elvis walked across the room. He turned away from the boy. Without warning, he struck one random chord behind his back. Daniel answered instantly. "G major." James Burton's eyebrows shot upward. Elvis changed again. Daniel smiled. "C minor." Another. "E." Another. "D7." One after another. Perfect. Every single time. No hesitation. No guessing. Simply certainty. No one spoke for nearly half a minute. Finally, Elvis slowly placed the guitar back onto its stand. He walked toward Daniel. "Son," he said softly, "how do you do that?" Daniel searched for the words. Speaking still required enormous effort. His mother gently rubbed his shoulder. "You don't have to answer." But Daniel wanted to. He looked at Elvis, then at the guitar, then quietly said, "The colors." The room frowned in confusion. "What colors?" Elvis asked. Daniel pointed toward the strings. "They shine." Nobody understood. His father smiled sadly. "He says that sometimes." Daniel continued. "This one," he pointed toward a G chord, "is gold." He pointed toward another. "This one is blue." Then another. "Green." James Burton slowly turned toward Elvis. Neither musician said a word. They had met gifted performers, child prodigies, master instrumentalists, but they had never met someone who seemed to see music. Daniel's mother took a deep breath. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," Elvis replied. She hesitated before speaking. "When Daniel was 4, the doctors told us not to expect much. They said he would probably never read, never hold conversations, never live independently. They told us to lower our expectations." A tear rolled down her cheek. "So, we stopped asking him to become what everyone else wanted. We simply let him listen to music." She smiled at her son. "And that's where he found his voice." Elvis remained completely silent. Her words reminded him of something his own mother had once told him as a boy. "God gives everyone something, son. Sometimes the world notices it. Sometimes it doesn't. He hadn't thought about those words in years. Until now. Just then, one of the hotel staff members hurried into the room. "Mr. Presley," he looked uneasy, "there are reporters outside." They heard about the little boy. "They want photographs. They're asking if you'll bring him out." The room instantly grew tense. Daniel's father instinctively stepped in front of his son. His mother wrapped an arm around him. They had seen this before. Curiosity, headlines, people treating Daniel like a spectacle instead of a child. Elvis looked toward the hallway, then back at Daniel. His expression changed. The warm smile disappeared. What he said next surprised everyone in the room. "No," the staff member blinked. "They're saying this could be tomorrow's front page." Elvis folded his arms. "I don't care." "But," I said no. His voice remained calm. "They came to photograph Elvis Presley." He looked at Daniel. "They're not turning that little boy into tomorrow's headline." The staff member quietly nodded and left. Daniel's parents looked at Elvis with tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, someone famous had protected Daniel's dignity instead of using his story. But Elvis wasn't finished. He looked at Colonel Parker. "I think we can do something much better than a newspaper." Colonel raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" Elvis smiled. "I've got an idea. And if it works," he glanced at Daniel, "it might change this family's life forever." The room fell silent. No one yet realized that Elvis's decision that night would lead to a gesture far greater than anyone had imagined. The hallway outside Elvis's dressing room had finally grown quiet. Most of the reporters had given up. The photographers packed away their cameras. The bright flashes that had lit the backstage corridors disappeared one by one. Inside the dressing room, however, no one seemed eager to leave. Daniel sat on a leather sofa, gently swinging his feet. His parents watched him with tired but grateful smiles. For the first time in years, no one was asking Daniel to perform. No one was staring at him. No one expected anything. Elvis leaned back in his chair, quietly watching the boy. Then he looked toward Colonel Parker. "I need a favor." Colonel smiled. "Those words usually cost me money." The room laughed. Elvis grinned. "This one's worth it." "What do you need?" "I want to bring Daniel back tomorrow." Colonel frowned. "For another show?" "No." Elvis shook his head. "For rehearsal." The room became silent. James Burton looked confused. "We don't rehearse tomorrow." "We do now," Elvis answered. The following afternoon, long before tourists filled the casino, long before the stage lights came alive, Daniel walked back into the empty showroom. It looked completely different without thousands of cheering fans. Rows upon rows of empty red seats stretched into the darkness. The giant stage suddenly seemed enormous. Daniel stopped walking. He looked nervous. Elvis walked over carrying 2 paper cups. One held coffee. The other held hot chocolate. "I had a feeling you'd prefer this," Daniel smiled. "Thank you." His words were still slow, still careful, but they came. His mother quietly wiped away another tear. Every sentence Daniel spoke felt like a precious gift. Elvis led him onto the stage. "Yesterday," he said, "everyone saw your courage." He gently placed a guitar in Daniel's lap. "Today, I want to see your ears." Daniel looked puzzled. Elvis smiled. "I'm going to play. You tell me what happens." James Burton stood across the stage with another guitar. Glenn Harden waited behind the piano. Ronnie Tutt sat at the drums. The full TCB band was there. Not for a concert, not for a recording, simply because they wanted to understand the remarkable little boy they had met. Elvis nodded. James struck a bright G chord. Daniel closed his eyes. Gold. Another chord. C. Green. A jazz chord followed. Daniel smiled. Purple. The musicians exchanged amazed glances. Ronnie whispered, "He's doing it again." Elvis decided to make it harder. He asked every musician to play at once. The piano, bass, drums, guitar, even the backup singers joined in. The rehearsal room filled with rich harmonies. Daniel listened for several seconds, then pointed around the room one by one. Guitar, he pointed directly at James. Piano, straight toward Glenn. Drums, without opening his eyes. Bass. Jerry Sheff laughed in disbelief. He's separating every instrument. Elvis slowly lowered his guitar. You've been listening your whole life, haven't you? Daniel nodded. I hear, he searched for the words, everything. His mother quietly spoke. Sometimes Daniel notices birds before we even know they're nearby. He hears clocks in other rooms. He can tell when one piano key is slightly out of tune. She smiled. We never understood why. Elvis looked thoughtfully toward the stage lights, then softly said, Maybe God tuned his ears differently. No one argued. Several days later, Elvis made a phone call. Not to a newspaper, not to a television station, not to a magazine. Instead, he contacted a respected music educator in California who specialized in teaching children with disabilities through music. I'd like you to meet a young man, Elvis said. I think he has something extraordinary. The educator agreed. Quietly, without publicity, without cameras, exactly the way Elvis wanted. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Daniel continued his lessons. His speech improved little by little. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Music became the bridge that helped him express thoughts he had struggled to share. Sometimes he still spoke only a few words. Other days he sang entire melodies. His teachers began noticing remarkable musical memory. He could hear a song once, then remember nearly every note. His parents no longer measured success by how many words he spoke. Instead, they celebrated every smile, every laugh, every moment of confidence. One evening in early 1973, Elvis returned to Las Vegas. Another sold-out audience, another unforgettable night. As he prepared backstage, Charlie handed him a small envelope. No return address. Elvis opened it. Inside was a photograph. Daniel stood beside an upright piano. He was smiling wider than Elvis had ever seen. On the back, only one sentence had been written. He asks to sing every morning now. Elvis quietly read it again, then folded the photograph with great care and slipped it into the inside pocket of his leather jacket. Charlie smiled. Good news? Elvis nodded. The best kind. That night's concert felt different. Not because of the lights, not because of the music, because Elvis carried a reminder close to his heart. During the middle of the show, he stepped toward the microphone. I've learned something over the past year. The audience listened. We spend a lot of time trying to fix people. He paused. But sometimes, he smiled gently, they don't need fixing. They just need someone willing to listen. The audience applauded warmly. Only Elvis knew exactly whom he was thinking about. Years later, long after that unforgettable Las Vegas performance, one of Elvis's former band members was asked during an interview about the most memorable concert he had ever played. The interviewer expected stories about famous celebrities, presidents, royal families, sold-out arenas. Instead, he smiled quietly. There was a little boy. The interviewer frowned. What did he do? The musician looked down before answering. He reminded the greatest performer in the world that music isn't about being the loudest voice. It's about reaching the quietest heart. No recording of that evening ever surfaced. No magazine cover captured the moment. No newspaper printed Daniel's photograph, exactly as Elvis had wanted. But for the people who filled that showroom in Las Vegas, the memory never faded. Some remembered the song. Some remembered the standing ovation. Others remembered seeing tears in Elvis Presley's eyes. Yet almost everyone remembered the same lesson. A child whom the world believed would never have much of a voice found one because someone famous chose compassion over publicity. And perhaps that was the greatest performance of the night. Not the one beneath the spotlight, but the quiet act of kindness that happened after the applause had ended. As the curtain fell and the audience slowly disappeared into the bright lights of the Las Vegas Strip, Elvis looked once more toward the empty front row where Daniel had sat the night before. He smiled to himself, then whispered words no microphone ever captured. "Keep singing, son." Because deep inside, Elvis understood something that fame had taken him years to learn. The greatest gift music can offer isn't applause, it is hope. And on one unforgettable night in Las Vegas, a little boy who rarely spoke gave thousands of people exactly that.